Hello, welcome to Dialogue. I'm Pandong in Beijing. Since 2008, the China-EU Culture Dialogue has been held annually. It brings together intellectuals, cultural practitioners and policymakers from China and Europe to strengthen cultural cooperation and develop people-to-people relations. This year, the dialogue is being held in Greece. And in attendance will be senior Chinese Communist Party official Liu Yunshan. So, what are cultural exchanges between China and Europe like at the present time? Will the Belt and Road Initiative reinvigorate the interaction between Western and Eastern civilizations? To talk about these and more, I'm joined in the studio by Mr. Feng Zhongping, Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations, and Mr. Michele Geraci, Head of the China Economic Policy Program at Nottingham University Business School in China. We will also talk to Mr. Fraser Cameron, Director of the EU Asia Centre in Brussels. But before we get started, let's take a look at this background report.
The 8th China-EU Culture Dialogue is being hosted by Greece this year. The dialogue first originated in 2008 in Beijing, with an overall objective to extend the existing cultural relations and the bilateral exchange activities into a long-term cultural dialogue between China and Europe. Since then, China and multiple EU countries have held Culture Year events successfully. There were China-France-China Culture Years from 2003 to 2005, a China-Italy Culture Year in 2006, a China-Germany Culture Year in 2012, a China-UK Culture Year in 2015. Cultural trade constitutes an important part of the overall trading between both sides. Cooperation can be found in art, literature, education, technology and youth exchange to promote mutual understanding and reach common development and prosperity. During the China-UK Culture Year, Nick Marchant, the art director of the British Council in China, said in an interview that next generation would be key words for the events ahead. To get more young people engaged in art activities, digitalization of the events is an important mission.
So let's get a discussion started. Gentlemen, we know that the China-EU Culture Dialogue has been held annually since 2008. So what is it exactly about and what has it achieved, Mr. Geraci?
Well, it has achieved a little bit of more mutual understanding and comprehension, perhaps, between the two cultures. The purpose of the dialogue is in a way to portray maybe the image of China into European. They probably don't really know much about China. Some, I'm European and I know, even before coming to China, even before entertaining a study about China and living here, perhaps a perception about the society, the culture was anchored to what we thought China is almost in Qin Shi Huangdi in the 200 before Christ.
Right.
We have not, in a way, upgraded our knowledge since then.
So what happened there? Do you think it's a lack of interest or it's lack of China's own public diplomacy?
It's maybe in one way we think that it's maybe the result of, first of all, we have distances. So we have 10,000 kilometers that make us apart. There is a little bit of China having been closed off for several years, for decades, in the last 100 years. We also know that China has gone through a period of difficulties in the last century, since 1840 until 1940, so 100 years of wars and things like that. And but let's not forget, I'm Italian, and we do know that, of course, Marco Polo was here in 1200 under the Yuan dynasty from Mongolia, but still part of China, of course. And even I was just reminded this morning by a friend of mine in the University of Padua in Italy, one of the oldest universities, that a Italian Jesuit, Matteo Ricci, was one of the first one to come into China in the Guangdong province in the city of Jiaoqing. And so now there is an ongoing relationship between the local university in Italy and the university in Guangdong province that tries to rejuvenate those old relationships from several hundred years ago. So it is good that now in the last few years we started to get to know each other and reset this dialogue.
So what's your take, Mr. Feng?
I think I agree with him. Culture exchange is always important in our history, between Europe and China. But in past 2 or 3 decades, China, Europe, especially China, focused too much very much on the trade, commercial activities, with Europe. Naturally, we have good reasons for that. But I think today, after 2 or 3 decades, our relations have indeed reached a high new stage, which brings, the culture aspect into our whole partnership. You know, when Xi Jinping visited Europe after he became the president of China in 2014, he declared 4 types of partnership between our two sides. You know, a partnership for peace, partnership for growth, which means economic growth, partnership for reform, and partnership for civilization. I think that means, you know, the Chinese government or Chinese people have gradually realized it's very important if we could, you know, have more meaningful exchanges, you know, of culture exchanges, people to people relationship. This is really will help our relationship, you know, become stronger. I think that is the basic idea.
Well, talking about reinvigorating cultural exchanges between the two sides, I have some figures for you, gentlemen. We know that China and EU established a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2003. Yes, and since then, dialogue mechanism has been set in more than 60 areas, and personnel exchanges exceed 5 million a year. And China and many EU countries held Culture Year regularly. Why? It's developing so fast, Mr. Geraci.
Because there is the need to understand each other. There is a gap of knowledge, like we just said. And so all these initiatives, which, like you just mentioned, they are not just aimed at learning about each other through books, maybe digitalization of material, which is the first step for people that perhaps are still, let's say, in Europe, and they want to get a little bit glimpse into China by being at home. But the important thing you mentioned is the exchange of physical people. You know, myself, I'm here. I live here, and there's things that you learn by being here that you cannot read on books. And in a way, this is an extension of maybe the activity that the European Union has started already several decades ago to allow the better mutual understanding of cultures within Europe. Because let's not forget, in 1945 we were killing each other in the fields of France and Italy, and after only 10 years, in 1955-57, the Treaty of Rome was signed, and the European Union started, and one of the first things that we did was to get to know each other, an exchange of students, professors, cultural and a university level, and also socially, so we had the people mobility. So I think the next step for this relation between China and Europe, which is again separated by 10,000 kilometers of pretty much desert, is to have more people, more foreign coming here, more Chinese going to live in Europe and in the West in general, and you know, for all walks of life, not just the scholars, but even just people doing business. If I may, just one example, we got to know China in 1980s in Italy by the large flux of people from Wenzhou that moved to Italy. In Italy, pretty much every Chinese who lives there comes from Wenzhou, and in fact from one part of Wenzhou, 500,000 more or less. You know, no one knows exactly, but 500,000 people, Chinese living in Italy, they all come from Wenzhou. So the first people, you know, I have a friend of mine who lived in Florence, where there was a textile industry of Wenzhounese, and he learned the language. He came to China and he realized he hadn't learned Putonghua, Mandarin. He had learned Wenzhou. So when he came here, he couldn't understand anything when he was outside of Wenzhou. But that was the first impression. He thought China was like Wenzhou people. Of course, that's only a very small representative, a non-representative sample. So when he came here, he just found out that there was much more than that.
So, Mr. Fu, what do you think is the major propellant of this faster development we just mentioned? Is it because China became the world's second largest economy? Is it out of economic interest?
Definitely, I think that is a very important reason which attracts Europeans to get more knowledge about China. But from China's point of view, I think, you know, there is still misunderstandings or misperceptions in Europe everywhere. You know, if you people like me who follows China-European relations for more than 20 years, I read the newspapers, website almost every day about what is going on in Europe. You frequently find there's still many misperceptions, or even not misperceptions, misunderstandings about China. So I think this is a very important reason for China to invest more on cultural activities, or invest more on cultural exchanges, invest more on students, scholars exchanges, and that will help the people in Europe to...
So what about public diplomacy? How do you think China's public diplomacy towards the European Union as a whole?
You know, I think, you know, the cultural exchanges really go beyond the government. You know, I think in the past years, the Chinese government focused on the officials, so-called elites. I think we need to go actually beyond them. We need to go to really talk to ordinary people in the street. That is probably public diplomacy means.
Right. So, Mr. Geraci, we know that at this time the China-EU Culture Dialogue is held in Greece, an ideal place to talk about history. Fill us in with some historical context between China and EU's exchanges.
First of all, of course, Greece is one of the most ancient civilizations. We know it is even prior to the Roman civilization in Europe, so one of the oldest together with China. So it is nice that it's held there. I think a symbolic reason also to be held there. Maybe they chose the wrong time of the year, summertime, so the beauty of Greece may distract the delegates from getting out to work things.
Isn't that a good thing?
But that's a very good thing, because you do learn about, as we said, not just by sitting in a room and having meetings, but actually to go around. Greece and part of southern Italy too have a large number of ancient Greek temples. I come from Sicily, and there are more Greek temples in Sicily than in Athens, because it was part of the Magna Graecia. And so it is nice that there is a delegation of people being in Greece. It's nice that these dialogues are held in places that have a nice cultural surrounding, rather than being in a 50-floor tall buildings that maybe lacks that kind of cultural heritage that those places have. So I'm supportive of the fact that it's been held in Greece. Like you just said, we want to see people, not just officials, to go there. But in a way, this is easier said than done, because it is fine to have Deng Xiaoping going to study in Paris many years ago, but it is a different thing, the average Chinese person with an income that does not quite allow to move and maybe even have a holiday. The cost of living in Europe is much higher than in China, and so for now what we witness is that this cultural exchange is more or less like a trickle-down situation. Rich people go first, and it's fine. And maybe when they come back, I think they should have, in a way, the duty, like in the old days when sailors used to go around, to come back and tell stories about what we've seen to those people who have been left behind. They had the opportunity to travel themselves.
Well, Mr. Feng, do you think the trickle-down situation, as Mr. Geraci just mentioned, is changing or will change in the near future?
I think, when the Chinese delegation come to Europe, or when the European delegation comes to China, we have this intensive culture exchange. Partly because I mentioned, we need each other. We need to know each other for economic reasons, for whatever. There's another very important thing. Culture is a broad concept in the sense of meaning. I think at the moment, both China and Europe in a transition period. Let me put it in this way mildly. We really need to think about how to reform each outside, but also we need to think about how to, something bigger, how the global governance, for example. I think the two sides could learn from each other. Two sides could actually communicate more on this. This is very, very important, I think, for the delegates.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your input. We'll be getting back to you very soon. You're watching Dialogue on CCTV News. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's continue this discussion on China-EU cultural exchanges. Gentlemen, we know that China is promoting the grand design of Belt and Road initiative proposed by President Xi Jinping. It's reconnecting two continents, maybe reconnecting the whole world in a win-win way. So how do you think cultural exchanges fit in this grand design, Mr. Geraci?
Well, let's say the ancient Silk Road had a reason, and the paradox is, I think the success of the Silk Road was that at the time the transport means were very slow. So you needed to stop every 100 kilometers and drink and find food and shelter. The new Silk Road, if we make it by high speed, and if it was at the speed, very, very successful development of the high-speed network in China, if you had a high-speed train from Beijing to Europe at 300 kilometers an hour, it would take less than a day to get there. And it completely just bypass Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, all the countries in the middle. So we have to be a bit careful if the Silk Road is, because basically there are not many people just in the middle. And so we need to be careful if the Silk Road is about the route or about the destination. Now, to me, it seems that the emphasis is more on the destination, which is the Middle East area and the Mediterranean basin. So Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, more than what's in between. Because there is not so much in between, and that's a good thing, because especially the Middle East, especially some parts of Europe, you said kindly, I think transition, I think you meant crisis. We do need a little bit of China to play a more active role, a stronger economic role. China is probably the only country that can mobilize immediately people, money, infrastructure and the resources of other types. So in a few days, China could just deploy what is needed to help those countries maybe stabilize from a political point of view, from a social point of view. So I'm very supportive of the One Belt, One Road, and I even have a hope, which I know is just a hope, that through better cultural exchanges and maybe better improvement of the economic situation in the Middle East, the current war climate that we breathe in the area could be brought to a more lower level. So that's the big challenge for China, bring in a way peace to an area that's been the theater of war for several years.
Right, Mr. Feng, in promoting the Belt and Road Initiative and achieving win-win results, you need to think about local situations. So what's your take on the European cultural situation right now? Because since the global financial crisis, we've heard so many times that European politicians are actually saying that multiculturalism is failing in Europe. Is that true?
They had a big problem in recent years. Politicians are claiming, the failing of this multicultural exploration. But I think it's too early to say that. Actually, it is against this background, I think the China-European Union or China-European cultural exchange is greatly important because we are actually showing an example of how civilization can tolerate each other, can learn from each other, can value each other. So this is a very good example. Back to this Belt Road Initiative, I think there are, it will definitely along the development of Belt and Road along the countries, definitely not just trade, not just infrastructure buildings. People to people's exchange, culture exchange will definitely be invested, but I want to argue is, we need actually be very well aware that, Belt Road Initiative is not just about, building up railways, building up bridges, airport. We need to actually, along with this economic development, along with infrastructure buildings, we need to pay very much importance on this culture understanding. Otherwise, we are running risk of some kind of culture clashes, because of the misunderstandings. Because you are meeting different people, different cultures along this Belt Road Initiative.
So if you are to explain China's Belt and Road Initiative to common Europeans, what would you say? What's the simplest way that you put it that is also culturally comprehensive?
I think we need to say beauty of each other through the Belt Road Initiative.
So what's your way, the simplest way, Mr.
To explain
Geraci?
the
Belt and Road Initiative to common Europeans?
I think it may not be the most correct, but the better way for them to understand it is a commercial initiative. China is the richest country in the world, and it has a lot of money, and they are now the Chinese economy is slowing down, or the growth is slowing down. China now is ready to, after having secured the stability of the domestic, is now ready to invest abroad. It's a little bit like a Marshall Plan or a way for the rest of the world. I think it's not true, but people would understand roughly what it is. It's not correct.
Let me also add up one thing. I think, the Belt Road Initiative, made by China, is actually partly based on our own experience of development. Chinese people believe, a secure world, secure region can be, based on the economic development. So we think, you know, this is a good thing.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and gentlemen, when people talking about history and culture, they think they are intangible. That they're not, they cannot be touched and felt. But that's not true. It's a misconception, right? Because it can be about the real economy. Tell us more about the dynamic in this regard between two sides.
Well, first of all, you do see the relics, the ancient relics, so it's something absolutely tangible.
And products, maybe.
And it's a product, yes. So first of all, you see, if you go to Greece, we talk about Greece, you're just surrounded by history and buildings all around. So you do feel it and you see it, and you can.
And that's tourism.
And that's tourism, but it is not just tourism, because when you read Greek poetry and you read it and maybe you overlook from the Athens Acropolis, or when you see the Acropolis from the city, and you see on top of the Greek temples, you do relate more to the original writers and the poets. Now, you mentioned, for example, even luxury goods in Italy, together with France, we're relatively good at. We do try to combine modern technology with tradition, and try to, you know, through this high-end product, maybe not available to everyone, but still we try to portray and to, in a way, carry on the tradition into this new product, which is relatively modern, new technology, and we can do this in other areas. So it's a combination of tradition and technology that makes it successful for those more intangible things to be actually delivered to the wider audience.
And Mr. Feng, how would you evaluate the status quo of China-EU cultural exchanges and relations in economic terms?
I think tourist is definitely the one thing. Secondly, you know, education exchange. You know, you are teaching in Nottingham University in China. That is actually part of this culture exchange. There are more and more Chinese students in UK, for example. You know, in many universities. 20 years ago, when I was in UK, there are very few Chinese students actually at that time, especially like me. You know, majored in history.
Sure.
A lot of us learning, you know, natural sciences, engineering, or management. But today, you know, the culture exchange covers a lot of things, but also healthy, youth exchange, tourism. So I think this is you can define this as a part of commercial, but not just that. I think it's more than that.
So what does that mean for the future relationship between the two sides? Do you think future leaders will even be coming out from this group of young people?
You know, in the future, we need leaders who really have a global, you know, world views, you know, who knows, you know, outside the world, who knows his own country, definitely as well. But so I think this culture exchange will definitely invest for the future.
And if I may, talking about the school, we teach in the university, so I see...
You have first-hand experience.
I have first-hand experience, and it's very good that we do that. We have a group of, for example, Italian Association of Italian Professors that teach around China, and we do try to exchange views.
So what's the typical makeup of your classroom?
My class is in Nottingham is about 80–90% Chinese, and about 10–15% foreigner from...
Are they keen to know
countries.
European culture?
No, because that's what we need to do more. It's good that we do this at university, but we need to do more, and we need to do this in high school. So we need to take children who are 13 years old, 12 years old, both in Europe and in China, and teach them that there are, you know, writers from each other places. Geography, very important. It's always like overlooked as is, yes, I just look at the map. No, it's important to know where things are. You know, just the rivers, the mountains, the name of the old philosopher, and start to read about each other's work. Now, I think this is a defect that both China and the West have. When I was in high school in Italy, I knew nothing about Chinese culture. I didn't know the name of a single Chinese author, or other than Beijing, Shanghai, I didn't know the name of cities. And I'm sure it is the same for Chinese students. Now, when they arrive at university, 17 years old, it's a little bit too late. They come to university to learn something that will make them money. They have no time to philosophize about culture. So we need to, you know, I don't know if this is in the agenda of the Greek and Heraklion meeting today, but they should be programs targeted at younger pupils, at primary school or even earlier, little bit, when they have time and they have the luxury not to worry about money, and they have the time, and probably the only time in life that they have, those 10 years, from 10 to 20 years old, to dedicate themselves to things that are not just, I teach finance, but let them do the cultural stuff maybe when they're younger, so they come readier, more prepared when they're at the university.
So, Mr. Feng, talking about a stable and sustainable future, you need to think about the status quo. Earlier you mentioned some worrying elements in Europe right now, like the rise of nationalism, populism, and trade protectionism, and a failure of multiculturalism. So, do you think all these elements will have repercussions on Europe's outbound exchanges?
Definitely, that's something that worries.
And how to manage it?
Yeah, I think we definitely need to. Firstly, I think economic recovery is a must, but that's not enough. I think we need to have encourage more politicians to think about not just natural practitionism, not just populism, being led by politicians should actually guide this. But in Europe, if you look at Europe, what is politicians now follow this populism. That is something concerns people. I think that China should through this culture dialogue to set some kind of signals. Exchanges. Is very important for today's world. Although we are living in a globalized world, but some people, some politicians in the mind are getting narrow and narrow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Geraci, as an Italian citizen, as a European citizen, are you optimistic about future relationship between China and Europe? Very quickly.
I'm optimistic. Yes, there is the optimism now is born from the fact that there is a lot to be done, and so I think things can get better very quickly. And I think there is a common interest. Remember, things get done when both parties have a common interest, and I think this is a situation where both we have an economic problem, political problem. China also has its economic challenges, and it's a win-win situation for both. If I could be here and teach better because I know a little bit more about China, it will be a win for both.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your input, and that's it for this edition of Dialogue on CCTV News. Bye-bye.